The sickening, violent tear of coarse linen echoed like a gunshot through the absolute, suffocating silence of the obsidian quarry. Dava fell to her knees against the jagged rocks, her breath hitching as the freezing winter air hit her bare skin. She had not removed her left sleeve in 4 years. Not for anyone. Now, the tattered fabric hung loosely from her shoulder, completely exposing the horrific, intricate grid of raised silver scars carved deep into her flesh. High Councilman Malachor stepped out from the royal entourage, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. He drew a silver-tipped whip from his belt, his face twisting into a mask of pure, self-righteous disgust. You have exactly 10 seconds to cover your shameful, unregistered flesh before he flay it from your bones, Malachor hissed, his voice echoing off the quarry walls. To display such grotesque insubordination in the direct presence of the Alpha King is an immediate death sentence. Guards, prepare to strike on my command. If you are new to the pack, do not move a single muscle. The scars this woman is desperately trying to hide are about to violently unravel an entire empire. Keep listening until the very end, because the Alpha King's reaction is going to rewrite the rules of survival. And do not forget to subscribe to Wolf Enigma so you never miss a tale of dark romance and absolute revenge. The 10-second countdown began, ticking away the final moments of Dava's miserable existence. She did not scramble to cover hers. She did not weep. She simply bowed her head, resigning hers to the brutal execution she had anticipated for 4 long years. But as Malachor raised the heavy silver whip, the towering Alpha King standing 3 feet away did not give the order to strike. Instead, his glowing amber eyes locked on her exposed arm, and the air pressure in the quarry completely flatlined. The obsidian quarry was not merely a place of grueling physical labor. It was a freezing, lightless graveyard for the forgotten. For 4 agonizing years, Dava had existed within its jagged depths, reduced to a nameless, invisible shadow among the unregistered laborers of the obsidian pack. The environment was meticulously designed to break the spirit before it broke the body. From the moment the pale sun breached the horizon until the frozen twilight enveloped the jagged mountains, she carried massive, sharp slabs of volcanic rock. The stone sliced through her thin, inadequate gloves, leaving her palms permanently coated in layers of dried blood and callus. She lived on a meager diet of stale crusts and stagnant water, sleeping on a freezing stone floor surrounded by the hacking coughs of the dying and the broken. Yet, through the starvation, the bone-deep exhaustion, and the perpetual cruelty of the overseers, Dova had maintained one absolute, unbreakable rule: she never rolled up her sleeves. Even in the sweltering heat of the summer months, when the quarry felt like the inside of a suffocating furnace, she wore heavy, coarse linen pulled tight down to her wrists. The other laborers mocked her relentless modesty. The overseers whipped her back for her stubborn refusal to comply with their uniform standards. She endured the lashings in absolute silence, biting down on her own tongue until her mouth tasted of copper, because the searing pain of a standard whip was nothing compared to the catastrophic danger of what lay hidden beneath the fabric. Scars covering her left arm were not the chaotic, jagged lines of a tickle beating or a random act of cruelty. They were deliberate. They were architectural. 4 years ago, before she was thrown into the lightless pit of the quarry, Dava had been subjected to the royal pack's darkest, most heavily guarded secret. High Councilman Malachor had established a subterranean disciplinary ward specifically designed for unregistered females, those vulnerable souls deemed unworthy of the pack's legal protection. In that damp, blood-soaked cellar, Malachor's enforcers did not just punish, they recorded. The intricate grid of raised, silver tissue carved deeply into Dava's flesh was a highly classified, archaic royal cipher. Every horizontal slash, every precise vertical intersection, was a meticulously documented code detailing the exact date of her torture, the specific infractions she supposedly committed simply by existing without registry, and the authorizing signature of the High Council itself. It was the physical, undeniable manifestation of the Midnight Protocol. The Midnight Protocol was a barbaric, institutionalized system of mutilation that Alpha King Valerius had explicitly and publicly outlawed on the very day he ascended the throne. Valerius had signed the Great Charter of Obsidian with his own blood, categorically banning the torture of the unregistered. He had stood before his entire empire, radiating absolute authority, and declared an era of unyielding justice. He had looked his High Council in the eyes, and they had bowed deeply, swearing that the protocols were permanent eradicated. The king had believed them. He had considered the matter completely resolved, turning his formidable attention to securing the territorial borders and fighting foreign wars. He was entirely unaware that the monsters he thought he had slain with the stroke of a pen were still operating freely within his own shadow. Malachor had simply moved the torture chambers underground, continuing the barbaric practices with arrogant, unchecked impunity. By carving the royal cipher directly into Dava's arm, Malachor was not merely punishing a low-ranking wolf, he was leaving a permanent, arrogant signature of his absolute treason. The scars were a literal ledger of the Council's betrayal, written in the only ink that could never be erased. Dava knew this truth intimately. She knew that if the Alpha King ever saw her arm, he would not merely see a victim abuse, he would see a walking, breathing indictment of his failed leadership. She had spent every waking second of the last 4 years ensuring that the catastrophic truth remained buried beneath her coarse linen sleeve. She had accepted her miserable, agonizing fate, sacrificing her own comfort, her own dignity, and her own health, all to prevent the empire from fracturing under the crushing weight of a horrific lie. Her silence was a shield protecting a king who did not even know she existed. But now, the linen was torn. The fragile, threadbare barrier between the king's carefully constructed reality and the grotesque truth had been ripped away by a stray, jagged rock during the sudden royal inspection. Dava knelt in the freezing mud of the quarry, staring down at the exposed, undeniable evidence of the Council's treason gleaming on her skin in the harsh winter light. She did not attempt to cover it with her other hand. It was far too late. The illusion of the empire was already over. She simply closed her eyes, bracing her shattered, trembling body for the agonizing bite of Malachor's silver whip, waiting for the dark, peaceful embrace of death to finally release her from the suffocating burden of carrying the kingdom's greatest sin. Alpha King Valerius stood in the center of the obsidian quarry like a towering monument carved from the very volcanic rock his people mined. He wore a heavy, sweeping cloak of black dire wolf fur that absorbed the weak winter sunlight. his broad shoulders squared with the crushing weight of absolute authority. For 10 years, he had ruled the Obsidian Pack with an iron fist wrapped in the velvet of unyielding law. He was a sovereign of justice, a man who had staked his entire reign on the eradication of the barbaric cruelties that had plagued his ancestors. He had come to the quarry today for a routine inspection, flanked by his council members, believing he was surveying a harsh but legally compliant labor facility. He was bored. He was detached. He was completely unaware that he was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would shatter his entire reality. Then, the freezing, bitter wind sweeping down from the jagged peaks suddenly shifted direction. It carried the sharp, metallic stench of the mines, sweat of the laborers, and the sulfur of the earth. But cutting through that toxic miasma was a singular, impossible fragrance. It was the scent of crushed wild mint, rain-soaked pine, and the faint, intoxicating sweetness of warm honey. The physiological reaction within Valerius was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, catastrophic, molecular detonation. An electrical shock of pure, unadulterated primal magic ripped down his spinal column with the force of a lightning strike. It seized his nervous system, paralyzing his lungs and fusing his soul to a frequency he had never encountered in his 30 years' existence. The blood roaring in his ears was deafening. Deep within the cavernous, heavily muscled expanse of his chest, a terrifying sound was born. It was not a human sound. It was a low, guttural, earth-shattering purr that vibrated through his ribs and resonated through the soles of his heavy boots, a primordial frequency demanding absolute, unconditional possession. His inner wolf, a beast of legendary discipline and terrifying lethality, slammed against the titanium cage of his mind, instant overriding his conscious thought. The beast howled a single, deafening, undeniable truth that echoed through his marrow: mate. Valerius stopped breathing. He slow-turned his massive head. The golden amber of his eyes, usually cold and calculating, began to flare with a blinding, radioactive intensity. He tracked the intoxicating scent through the freezing air, his supernatural vision cutting through the dust and the shadows. His glowing eyes locked onto the fragile silhouette kneeling in the frozen mud 3 feet away. She was small. She was trembling uncontrollably in the biting cold. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt, obscuring her face, and her clothing was nothing more than coarse, tattered rags. But to his fully awakened predatory senses, she was the absolute center of the universe. She was the gravity holding his world together. Desperate, agonizing need crashed over the Alpha King. He felt an overwhelming compulsion to drop to his knees in the filth, to wrap his heavy fur cloak around her shivering shoulders, to pull her into his chest and slaughter anyone who dared to even look at her. He took a single, heavy step forward, the command to halt the execution already forming on his tongue. He was prepared to claim his Luna in front of the entire empire. But then, the winter wind whipped across the quarry, fluttering the torn, ragged linen of her left sleeve. Valerius froze. His enhanced, predatory vision snapped from her trembling shoulders down to her exposed flesh. The universe did not merely stop. it completely collapsed. Valerius was not just a powerful wolf, he was a military commander, a master of territorial law, and a king who intimately knew the darkest archives of his own empire. When he looked at the raised, silver tissue covering his fated mate's arm, he did not see random injuries. He did not see the chaotic, jagged lines of a typical beating or the careless strike of a cruel overseer. He saw a document. He saw the precise, architectural grid of the Midnight Protocol. With the clinical, horrified clarity of a judge reading a tribunal ledger, the Alpha King read the skin of the woman he was born to love. He saw the deep, horizontal laceration carving across her bicep, the specific royal scythe denoting an unregistered female. He saw the overlapping, geometric vertical cuts intersecting the horizontal line, creating a tally system that recorded the exact duration of her starvation periods. His glowing eyes tracked down to her elbow, where he saw the distinct, agonizing circular burns branded into her joints. It was the encrypted, unmistakable signature of High Councilman Malacor's subterranean disciplinary ward. Valerius read the dates encoded in the scar tissue. He read the infractions. He read the horrific, systematic methodology of a torture protocol he had explicitly outlawed on the very day he took the crown. The realization was a lethal poison flooding his veins. He had signed the Great Charter. He had outlawed these practices. He had looked High Councilman Malacor in the eyes, and Malacor had sworn on his life that the torture chambers were dismantled. Valerius had believed the lie. He had sat on his velvet throne, secure in his righteous delusion, believing he was a good king. And while he slept in a warm palace, the men he trusted had dragged his other half into lightless, freezing basement and carved their arrogant treason directly into her bones. The euphoric, intoxicating warmth of the newly awakened mate bond was instantly incinerated. In its place, a cold, apocalyptic dread took root, followed immediately by an anger so massive, so profound, that it threatened to permanently fracture the Alpha King's sanity. He did not scream. He did not shout. He did not draw his sword. The true, world-ending terror of the Obsidian King was never loud. The atmospheric pressure in the quarry simply plummeted to absolute zero. The air became suffocatingly heavy, saturated with a killing intent so pure and absolute that the solid gravel beneath his heavy boots began to crack and splinter into dust. He was looking down at his broken, bleeding mate. But the Alpha King was no longer seeing a victim. He was looking at the undeniable, written proof of a betrayal that could only be answered with the total annihilation of his entire council. High Councilman Malacor was a creature of political architecture, a man who navigated the treacherous currents of the Obsidian Court through whispered conspiracies and carefully constructed lies. He did not possess the heightened, primordial instincts of a supreme alpha. He was entirely blind to the catastrophic, molecular shift occurring in the atmospheric pressure. Standing in the center of the freezing quarry, grasping the silver, tipped leather of his disciplinary whip, Malacor was oblivious to the fact that the universe had just fundamentally altered its axis. He looked at Alpha King Valerius. He observed the towering monarch staring intensely at the kneeling, shivering female in the mud. Malacor, blinded by his own arrogant hubris, drastically misinterpreted the king's absolute, paralyzing stillness. He assumed the king was paralyzed by royal disgust. He assumed the king was offended by the sight of an unregistered laborer defying the uniform code. "Do you see the grotesque insolence?" my king, Malachor sneered, his voice dripping with venomous self-righteousness. He took a deliberate, heavy step closer to Dava, gesturing toward her exposed, scarred arm with the polished obsidian handle of his weapon. "These unregistered vermin are a relentless blight upon your pristine empire. They refuse to assimilate. They refuse to wear the uniform. They hide their filth in the shadows. This wretched creature dares to expose her mutilated flesh in your divine, sovereign presence. It is a direct insult to the crown. It is a mockery of the order you have built. But Zarnot Troubleyov, my king, I will correct this immediate offense. I will strip the remainder of the skin from her back to remind the others of their absolute place beneath our boots." Malachor raised his arm high into the freezing air. The braided silver whip caught the pale, weak sunlight, gleaming with a cruel, lethal promise. Dava squeezed her eyes shut. She bit down on her cracked lip until she tasted hot copper. She braced her emaciated, trembling body against the jagged rocks. She waited for the agonizing, familiar tear of metal through her fragile skin. She waited for the blinding white flash of pain. The pain never arrived. The world snapped. Reality tore wide open. Valerius moved. He did not step. He did not lunge. He simply ceased to exist in his previous location. The laws of physics shattered, violently bending around his massive, muscular frame. In the space of a single, imperceptible microsecond, the Alpha King materialized directly between the High Councilman and the kneeling woman. Malachor swung the heavy whip with all of his sadistic strength. Valerius did not even look at the incoming weapon. He raised his bare left hand and intercepted the strike mid-air. He caught the braided silver leather effortlessly. He did not flinch. The lethal silver, forged specifically to burn and melt werewolf flesh, hissed violently against his broad palm, releasing a thick plume of acrid smoke. Valerius simply squeezed his fist. The heavy, reinforced weapon did not just snap. It disintegrated. The enchanted metal groaned in agony, fractured into 1,000 microscopic pieces, and pulverized into a fine, glittering dust that drifted harmlessly away in the biting winter wind. Malachor gasped. The breath was violently stolen from his lungs. His smug, arrogant smile vanished in an instant. The political confidence that had shielded him for a decade morphed instant into primal, suffocating terror. Valerius turned his massive head. His golden eyes were no longer eyes. They were dying stars. They radiated a blinding, lethal, radioactive energy that incinerated the surrounding shadows of the quarry. The Alpha King did not scream. He did not shout a command. He did not draw the heavy broadsword strapped to his back. The true, ending terror of the Obsidian King was never loud. It was absolute. Valerius released his dominant aura. It was not a mere display of territorial dominance. It was an apocalyptic environmental event. The gravity in the quarry violently multiplied. The ground shuddered as if struck by a massive seismic tremor. The heavy, Volcanic rock beneath their boot spider, webbed with deep, jagged fissures, groaning ominous under the sudden, impossible weight. Every single elite royal guard in the perimeter collapsed simultaneously. They did not bow out of respect. They were physically driven into the dirt by an invisible, crushing, atmospheric pressure. Heavy iron armor buckled and dented. Bones creaked dangerously. Lungs violently compressed. The deadliest soldiers of the Obsidian Pack lay flat against the freezing mud, completely paralyzed, gasping desperately for air that sudden felt as thick and heavy as liquid lead. Only High Councilman Malachor remained standing. But he was not standing by choice. He was locked in place by a supernatural terror that entirely paralyzed his motor functions. Valerius reached out. He wrapped his massive, indestructible hand directly around Malachor's throat. He lifted the High Councilman entirely off the ground with a single, effortless motion of his arm. Malachor choked. He kicked his heavy boots frantically in the empty air. His manicured hands clawed desperately at the king's immovable forearm, tearing at the heavy fur cloak. It was completely useless. He was a brittle, fragile twig caught in the inescapable jaws of a primordial leviathan. "My King," Malachor wheezed, his face turning a mottled, desperate purple, his eyes bulging with sheer, unadulterated panic. I was only enforcing your law." Valerius tightened his iron grip. Sickening, structural crunch echoed through the dead silence of the paralyzed quarry. "You do not know my law," Valerius whispered. The king's voice was demonic. It was a terrifying, layered, overlapping frequency of a sovereign man and a monstrous, primordial beast. It vibrated with such catastrophic, localized force that it shattered the glass oil lanterns hanging from the wooden quarry scaffolding 30 feet away. "You forged my royal signature in the dark," Valerius continued. His tone was completely devoid of any heat or passion. It was cold, clinical, and absolute. "You built a torture chamber beneath my throne. You took the charter I signed in blood and used it as a shroud to hide your butchery. You carved your arrogant treason deeply in the flesh of my people." Valerius pulled the thrashing councilman inches closer to his face. The king's glowing, radioactive eyes burned straight through Malachor's terrified soul. "You carved it into my mate." Malachor instant stopped struggling. The words hit his conscious mind like a physical execution. The unregistered female. The scarred, broken laborer in the mud. The king's fated mate. The catastrophic, unimaginable magnitude of his error fully registered in his widening, terrified eyes. He had confidently signed his own death warrant 4 years ago in that subterranean cellar, and the executioner had finally arrived to collect the debt. He tried to beg. He tried to scream for mercy. Valerius categorically denied him the privilege of making another sound. The Alpha King did not use his razor-sharp claws to shred the traitor's throat. He channeled the sheer, cataclysmic force of his sovereign, supernatural power directly into the councilman's chest. It was a spiritual obliteration. The invisible, supernatural impact violently ruptured Malachor's sacred connection to his inner wolf. the ethereal tether snapping sound like a deafening, psychic thunderclap. Malakor's physical body convulsed with horrific violence. His ribs shattered internally under the localize, crushing gravity of the king's concentrated wrath. Valerius casually opened his hand. Malakor dropped heavily into the freezing mud like a discarded sack of broken stones. He was not dead. Death was a swift, honorable mercy that Valerius refused to grant him. Malakor was permanently stripped of his royal rank, severed from his wolf spirit, and completely paralyzed from the neck down. He was now an empty, shattered vessel, lying helplessly in the freezing dirt he had forced others to mine, choking continuously on his own spectacular ruin. The threat was eradicated. The reality-bending wrath had concluded. The Alpha King had permanently reclassified his trusted visor into a cautionary tale of absolute destruction. The absolute, suffocating silence that followed the destruction of High Councilman Malakor was heavier than the supernatural gravity that had preceded. The shattered remains of the silver whip glittered in the freezing mud like fallen snow. The elite royal guards, slow regaining their ability to breathe as the apocalyptic pressure in the quarry dissipated, remained firm pressed against the earth. They did not dare to move. They did not dare to look up. They simply lay in the dirt, entirely paralyzed by the catastrophic revelation that their sovereign had just dismantled the highest-ranking official in the Empire with nothing more than the catastrophic force of his own aura. Valerius stood in the center of the devastation, his massive chest heaved with the exertion of reigning in a primordial beast that desperately wanted to slaughter every breathing creature in the Sility. He closed his glowing, radioactive eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them again, the terrifying reality, Ben God of War, had vanished entirely. The entity that remained was a profoundly broken man. Valerius turned away from the paralyzed, wheezing traitor bleeding in the mud. He unfastened the heavy, solid gold clasped his throat and let his sweeping, black dire wolf fur cloak slide from his broad shoulders. He held the massive garment in his hands and took a slow, agonizing step toward the fragile woman kneeling in the freezing dirt. Dava had not opened her eyes. She was still braced against the jagged volcanic rocks, her emaciated body trembling violently in the bitter wind. She was trapped in the psychological stasis of a trauma victim, her mind completely unable to process the physical impossibility that she had not been struck. She was still waiting for the whip. She was still waiting for the agony. The Alpha King did not speak. He knew that the sudden thunder of his voice would only shatter her further. Instead, he closed the final distance between them. And right there, in scent of the filthy, blood-stained quarry, in full view of his elite military guard, the supreme ruler of the Obsidian Empire dropped to his knees. The heavy thud of his knees striking the frozen gravel echoed through the silent cavern. He did not care about his velvet trousers tearing on the rocks. He did not care about the mud soaking into his skin. He leaned forward and gently, with the agonizing tenderness of a man handling spun glass, draped his massive, immaculately warm fur cloak over her trembling, freezing shoulders. The sudden, enveloping warmth shocked Dava out of her paralysis. She gasped, her gray-blue eyes snapping open to find the most powerful predator on the continent kneeling directly at her eye level. Valerius did not try to pull her into a suffocating embrace. He understood the fundamental architecture of her fear. Instead, he reached out with a hand that was large enough to crush a man's skull and hovering it inches away from her skin. He silently asked for permission. Dava stared at him, her breath catching in her throat, and infinitesimally, she nodded. Valerius gently took her left arm. He supported her elbow with his palm, his golden eyes dropping to the exposed, horrific grid of raised silver scars. Up close, the royal cipher was even more devastating. He could see the jagged edges where the cuts had become infected in the damp, lightless cellar. He could see the precise, calculated cruelty in every single brand. "I signed a piece of parchment," Valerius whispered, his voice cracking, completely devoid of its sovereign command. A single, burning tear broke free from his amber eyes, carving a clean path through the dust on his face. "I sat in a gilded room, surrounded by applause, and I signed a charter. I believed that my ink was enough to eradicate the monsters. I believed I was a righteous king." He slowly traced his thumb in the air, a millimeter above the horizontal scar dissecting her bicep. "I was deaf," Valerius continued, his voice trembling with a profound, soul-crushing remorse. "I was entirely blind. While I slept in peace, you were dragged into the dark. You bore the physical weight of my catastrophic ignorance. You protected this empire with your silence, holding my failure in your flesh for 4 agonizing years." Dava stared at the weeping king. For 4 years, she had meticulously trained hers never to cry. Crying was a dangerous vulnerability that invited more punishment. But the ancient, thrumming frequency of the mate bond was currently flooding her nervous system with an overwhelming, undeniable sensation of absolute safety. The Alpha King was not looking at her with pity or disgust. He was looking at her with a devotion so pure and absolute that it began to melt the glacial ice surround her heart. A choked, quiet sob finally broke past her lips, the first sound of genuine emotion she had made in half a decade. Valerius bowed his head, gently pressing his forehead against the scarred, ruined flesh of her forearm. He wept silently in her skin, surrendering his crown, his pride, and his entire existence to the woman he had failed to protect. After a long, heavy moment of absolute catharsis, the Alpha King lifted his head. Sorrow in his eyes hardened into cold, terrifying judicial clarity. He did not look back at the guards, still pinned to the earth, but his voice echoed across the quarry with the irrevocable finality of a death knell. "Every single overseer, guard, and administrator in this facility is now under royal arrest," Valerius commanded, his tone echoing like striking iron. "You will excavate the subterranean disciplinary wards you built. You will place High Councilman Malachor inside the deepest, dark cell you can find. You will seal the door with solid iron, and you will leave him there in the absolute dark. He will not be executed. He will live the remainder of his miserable, fractured existence experiencing the exact, agonizing despair he inflicted upon my queen. And if a single drop of water or crust of bread reaches him, I will personally burn this entire mountain to ash." The transition from the freezing, lightless depths of the obsidian quarry to the opulent, sunlit halls of the royal palace did not happen overnight. The healing of Dava's broken, emaciated body required weeks of meticulous, specialized medical care from the kingdom's most elite physicians. But the healing of her shattered spirit was a delicate, agonizingly process guided entirely by Alpha King Valerius. He absolutely refused to leave her side. He fed her when her scarred hands trembled, tore violently to hold a silver spoon. He read to her in the quiet, desperate hours of the night when the phantom echoes of the subterranean ward threatened to drag her back into the dark. And slowly, day by day, the terrified, starving laborer was replaced by a woman of quiet, unbreakable steel. When the day of the royal coronation finally arrived, the sprawling grand hall of the Obsidian Court was packed with every remaining lord, military commander, and council member in the empire. They stood in absolute, breathless silence as the heavy oak doors swung open. Dava did not walk down the pristine marble aisle wearing long, concealing velvet sleeves. She wore a breathtaking, sleeveless gown of spun silver and midnight silk. Her arms were completely bare, displaying the horrific, intricate grid of the Midnight Protocol to the entire world. She wore her scars not as a mark of shame, but as a legendary armor of survival. They were the physical proof that she had carried the darkest sins of an empire and refused to break. Alpha King Valerius met her at the base of the dais. He did not look at the assembly. He looked only at the woman who had saved his soul. He gently took her scarred hands in his, pressing a lingering, reverent kiss against the raised silver tissue of the royal cipher. Then, he turned to the court and placed the heavy, diamond-encrusted crown of the Luna upon her head. The entire Obsidian pack dropped to their knees as one, their heads bowed in absolute submission to the Unscarred Queen, the woman who had bled for their ignorance and had risen to rule them all. What a breathtaking journey of absolute betrayal and ultimate retribution. But now, I have to ask you a provocative question. If you were Alpha King Valerius, would you have locked High Councilman Malachor in that freezing, subterranean cell to slowly lose his mind in the absolute dark? Or would you have granted him the swift, immediate mercy of a royal execution? Did the traitor get exactly what he deserved? Or was the punishment too cruel? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you are addicted to dark fantasy romance, spine-tingling mate bonds, and kings who will burn the world down for their queens, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow audiobook lovers, and subscribe to Wolf Enigma. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter. Until next time, stay wild and bear the shadows of the pack.